Oh, there. All right, so looks like, all right, can you hear me now?
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect, yep. Now let me plug the speakers in. All right, try one more time. Can you hear me now? Yep, perfect. All right. All right, so Dave did introduce you. So whenever you're ready, we're ready for you.
Great, and is this being projected onto a wall somewhere? Something like that?
Yes, it's onto a screen, yep.
Okay, wonderful. Can you enable screen sharing?
I hope so.
Me too.
I don't know if I'm an admin. Host. Oh, John, are you on, John? Are you the host? Because I don't think I can. I don't know if I'm the actual host. Hold on. Let me see here. I don't think I have admin.
It should be open.
But I think Sam set up the admin stuff. And either John or Sam has the admin rights. I don't think I have admin rights.
No, I think.
All right, let me see. My post for you. Yeah, I don't think I have any admin rights. I don't have any things here to do it. So I apologize real quick, Melanie. Sorry for all the delays.
Don't worry about it.
Settings anywhere. No, that's audio.
I don't have Elizabeth or.
They're on the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike came into that video.
John, are you on? John or Elizabeth?
Yeah, because I don't have.
She can't see. Melanie, you can't see us, right?
No, she
I
can see
you
it.
guys. I'm just unable to share my screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like there's an admin thing that I don't know how to get to, and I don't think we have the admin rights. I think it's actually Sam.
Oh, really?
It's either Sam or John.
In which case, I don't want to delay too long. So if you can't get that enabled, I can share the link with you, and you'll just have to click through my slides manually.
That's perfectly fine. I can do that.
Okay.
It's as high as it goes. All right, I have it up. So let me put it in presentation mode. 1 second. Why can I find presentation mode now?
It should be top right.
Right.
Present or slideshow mode.
Slideshow.
Yeah, slideshow.
Yeah. All right. I think I should hold on presenter view. All right, we're good. I got it up.
All right. Everyone can see everything okay and hear me okay? We're good to go?
Yep, I'm on the screen that says introduction.
Okay, you're on the screen that says introduction. In that case, go ahead and click forward until you see my name. My name is Melian Huang, but I go by Lily, since that's a lot easier to remember. It's a nickname one of my friends gave to me a while back. If you click to the next 2 transitions, the top row is the languages that I speak, and the bottom row is the languages that I'm trying to learn, meaning that I have some basic vocabulary and things like that. I promise this will eventually be fish related. If you go to the next slide, I have been keeping fish since around 2013. That was the end of middle school for me. I am only 21 years old, sorry guys. And my favorite species is the ropefish. Right now I am in my senior year of Minerva University. So if you click to the slide, there should be one that says occupation.
Yep, we're there.
Great. So I'm a senior at Minerva University. It's a really small university based in San Francisco, and their structure is very unique in the sense that you don't have any in-person classes. The school only owns one building in San Francisco, and all of the classes are remote, but they take the form of a Socratic seminar rather than a lecture. And you can specialize your major. So what I'm doing is I'm majoring in psychology with a minor in biology, obviously hoping to get into the world of fish, freshwater fish in particular, and to the project, freshwater fish conservation. Since I am a senior, I am writing my senior capstone this year, and it is about this project that I've been working on. I've been toying with this idea for a couple of years now, but I didn't really start to seriously do research until very recently. So if you click to the next slide, you'll see a table of contents. Another unique thing that my school does is we don't get grades. We don't get A, B, C, D, or F. We get graded on concepts on a scale of 1 to 5. And I picked the 4 most relevant concepts. They do make it in the format of hashtags, and I'm not entirely sure why they decided to do that. But the 4 hashtags that I found to be most relevant were right problem, break it down, networks, and design thinking. So the first thing that we have to do, if you click to the next slide, is define the problem. What is holding back freshwater conservation? If we don't fully understand what the current state of the problem is and what the problem itself is, then any solution that we would design then becomes ineffective. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that 60 million people is the number of people that rely on fish to survive. Some of this is for food, some of this is by occupation, and it is a mix of both marine and freshwater. But it just highlights the importance of fish in general for our survival. The next slide is also more numbers. According to recent reports, around 33% of freshwater species are threatened with extinction, which there are 18,075 currently described freshwater species, with many more undescribed species, and 80 species that have already been declared extinct in the wild, just over the last decade. So if you go to the next slide, we need to figure out what all of these have in common. So some of the main problems that you'll see in reports and things like that is invasive species, habitat loss, and overconsumption. So for invasive species, it can happen for any number of reasons, whether it be people releasing their pet goldfish into lakes or a tropical storm releasing lionfish into Florida waters, things like that. But it's basically any non-native species that is outcompeting the native species or disturbing the balance of the current ecosystem. The second one is habitat loss, so human activity causing the shrinking or the desecration of any livable habitat, whether that be deforestation or pollution or anything along those lines that would make something no longer livable for a species. And the last one is overconsumption. So consumption that decimates populations. In some areas, it's overcollection for the hobby, but in most areas, it's overfishing and overharvesting, usually for aquaculture. So what all these things have in common, if you click to the next slide, is communication. All of these problems stem from the fact that we are not communicating properly with each other. Next slide, please. Again, we have to go one level deeper. So what exactly is communication? For us, communication can be broken down into 4 essential parts in order to tackle the problems that we already split it into. So the first, next slide, is education. Education helps reduce the negative impacts that a local population will have on a waterway, as well as improving quality of life. So a lot of times pollution is caused not by people willfully harming the environment, but rather than not having the proper techniques or the education in order to properly dispose of waste, for example, or to lean towards more sustainable alternatives, which is a privilege in a lot of areas. The next one is data transfer, so sharing information between groups to avoid redundancy. When I was conducting the interviews, I conducted around 40 or 50 of them with various professionals in the IUCN, in CARES, in CITES, in US Fish and Wildlife. I talked a little bit of everywhere. And one thing that stood out to me was the fact that there was not enough funding for freshwater conservation, but even when it was being used for duplicates. I talked to the Tennessee Aquarium, for example, and they surveyed an area of the Tennessee watershed. And 2 months later, a different organization surveyed that same area for the same species. And that's a good thing, right, to have that information, but it doesn't need to be done twice. And the only reason that happened is because of the lack of communication between these groups as to who's doing what. The next one is collaboration. So collaboration leads to more efficient use of resources. And that ties in very closely to what I was saying before with the Tennessee watershed. Had they communicated and been able to collaborate, they could have surveyed 2 areas or potentially more as a collaboration between the organizations instead of being redundant and surveying the same area. And the last one is continuity. So information that is not centralized is very easily lost. When I interviewed the places that I talked to, a lot of them were saying that they were emailing Google spreadsheets to each other or Excel spreadsheets to each other in order to say, for example, a lot of the hatcheries that I talked to said that they would email their partners individually to make sure that they all had the information, but that is very easily lost. And when I interviewed the lead of the Leadville National Hatchery and asked him where he kept all of his information, he said, well, to be honest, it's mostly in my head. And I know as hobbyists, we're very, very guilty of this. When I've talked to people, they are a complete wealth of knowledge. Like when I was at the Triple Crown Convention in Kentucky, for example, I met so many specialists, whether that be in cories, in killifish, in cichlids. Everyone had a very niche area of interest that they knew so much about. But where does that information go, right? It stays very localized. So someone who's on the other side of the world or in a different country or even in a different state has to do all of the same research and go in depth in the same manner as the person who's already done that work. So in order for us to move forward, we need to have a way to build upon each other instead of starting over from scratch every time. So the next slide, the right problem has.
I have a question for you real quick.
Yes,
Sorry.
of course. Feel free to type them into
Sorry
the
to
chat
interrupt.
as well, or just
Did you?
speak up.
Yeah. So, did you do any work with like the G'dad working group at all?
I have reached out to them, but I've been unsuccessful in contacting them.
Okay, because they seem to have like a pretty decent, at least somewhat of a network. At least there's something, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I have reached out to a bunch of the big groups, but that's another reason why I went to the Triple Crown Convention in Kentucky, because it's so much easier to reach out to someone in person and explain my project and what I'm working on. And, you know, those connections, people who know people. Most of this is about networking, which will be relevant in a later slide.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if we move on to the next one, there are a list of constraints and requirements. So any potential solution has to be specific and actionable, right? Like, I don't know if they had you set SMART goals ever, but it has to be affordable and sustainable. So the hobby is really expensive generally, right? So any extra cost or burden to the hobbyist is likely to not be as effective because people don't want to spend as much money, right, to find information that should be free. Targets, so they have to work across different agents. Not only does the solution have to target hobbyists, but it also has to target those research institutions and the aquariums. And lastly, it has to be easy to understand and use. There are a lot of different people in the aquarium hobby and research and everything like that, and not all of them are great at using technology, for example. So we have to factor in our audience. So
Can I interrupt you for just a second again? Sorry, I think I got off track of slides. Where are you at?
I'm at the constraints and requirements slide, which I believe is slide 18.
Okay, so, all right, hold on. All right, I'm good now.
Okay, perfect.
I think we got talking. I think I got off slides. So
yeah, no worries. Most of this is just to reinforce what I'm saying anyways. There's not a whole lot of text on there. But for the requirements, we have to connect key agents, we have to centralize the information, and we have to coordinate conservation efforts. So with all of this in mind, we can move on to the next step and consequently the next slide, which is break it down. So what are the main parts of this problem and how do we address them? Next slide. As I said in the requirements, we have to centralize, connect, and coordinate. That's it for break it down. Honestly, we did a lot of the work in the right problem. So now we can move on to networks, which is what I said would be most relevant here. As I said at the Triple Crown, being able to present this project to all sorts of people and see the interest and potentially the criticisms was really important. But for networks, we have to figure out how freshwater agencies, hobbyists, and conservation groups can work together and what is the current state of the problem. So if we look at the next slide, it should just be a bunch of small boxes with different colored arrows. The text on them is not so important. But it's a mess. So all of the red arrows that you see represent a link between organizations in which information does not flow well. So whether that be an individual person is in charge of uploading things manually to a database, or they're still emailing each other spreadsheets instead of having a centralized location. And a lot of those organizations with red arrows are the ones that are really important to this effort. So you can see that the CARES group and the IUCN have poor information transfer. The World Wildlife Fund doesn't have very good information transfer with the other zoos that I interviewed. CITES has okay information transfer, but you're seeing all of these big groups that don't really communicate well with each other. However, there are a couple of green ones. So the Indianapolis Zoo and the London Zoo, for example, surprisingly have good communication simply because somebody who was working at the London Zoo moved to the Indianapolis Zoo and retained all of the connections that they had made while they were working there, therefore establishing a good partnership. And those are the kinds of things I was looking for, is what groups have good information transfer and what can we learn from them? So we need to get rid of all of the red and the yellow and the gray arrows because those represent information isn't flowing. Information is being stuck somewhere, and that's what's holding back freshwater conservation. So if you go to the next slide, this is a map so far of the places that I've identified. So the biodiversity hotspots often have organizations already working on them. So you'll see a lot of South America. There is the Amazon there, which is, a pretty small place to get fish from. And you have lots of places in the US that are working, and you'll see the overlap between the biodiversity hotspots and the people that I've connected with, which are already working with those species. There's no need for us to reinvent the wheel. I don't need to go to the Amazon and start over completely and say, okay, this is how we're going to do conservation. I don't need to go to Kenya and say, this is how we're going to do conservation. Those people are already there. So the important part is not creating something new, an entirely new project that's going to take the world by storm, rather taking everything that already exists and making it better, improving it. So if you go to the next slide, we get our last section, which is design thinking. And basically this means looking at our problem and looking at the way we broke it down and then iterating and improving the solution. So first, you'll see the methodology, which is the next slide. As I said, this is going to be my senior capstone, and that's going to be very research driven. Just for the proposal, I had a 40-page paper with almost a literature analysis, annotated bibliography, all of these things that my professor had to read and give me feedback on. But basically looking at all of the current stages of freshwater conservation and drawing inspiration from marine conservation. Because marine conservation is doing several things right. Besides having more funding, they also get more attention. And how does that happen is through media, right? So I don't know if anyone has ever gone to a fish store with somebody who doesn't know fish and they've walked up to the saltwater section and gone, oh, look, it's Nemo. Oh, look, it's Dory. Those are the things we need for freshwater. Because as wrong as they might be, or maybe they're right, I don't know, they recognize it. People want to protect the things that they know about. And the problem with freshwater fish is that a lot of them are from the middle of nowhere. There's this brown little species that hides in a tank. I don't know if any of you guys keep catfish, but for example, you buy a catfish and then you never see it again, right? So things like that is why it's necessary for us to raise awareness of that. So everyone who's posting pictures on social media, for example, or talking to their friends about it, all of those little efforts add up. And that's what we've learned from saltwater conservation, especially. The analysis is everything that I've just talked about, going through this and finding which parts of the system would be most effective to target for change. And then the data study is looking at, all of the freshwater work that has already been done. I read so many papers on different kinds of aquaculture and raising fish for ornamental purposes, and it's a huge source of income for a lot of places. So thinking that, we have to exclude the native populations of people from the conservation effort is definitely not the way to go. And the last part is the comparison. So I built a database, but it's different from all of the other databases that exist, whether it be iNaturalist or Planet Catfish or anything like that. And I'm going to show you why. So the next slide says we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. We've been using a lot of technology, and technology is partially the reason why we're in this spot, because of all of the availability and the ability to ship from one end of the world to another. But I'm going to show you what I've developed, and this is the product that I was pitching at the Triple Crown convention. So technology is our greatest advantage. You should click forward until you see a slide with a bunch of different fish pictures on it.
All right, hold on a second here. I think I just, hold on. All right. This looks like a frontosa, pufferfish, salmon.
Yep, that's
Okay.
the correct slide. So this is the database. And if you click through, just go one slide at a time. The next slide should show you a goby, the blue neon goby. You'll see that it has the picture, and it's a camera gallery, so you can scroll through, nothing too unusual there. It shows you the status and a written description, as well as the scientific name and the common name. If you go to the next slide, it'll show you quick stats, diet, tank size, temperature, parameters. And if you go to the next slide, it'll show you breeding. So spawn type, spawn size, season, any tips, things like that. So far, nothing too unusual, right?
Right.
What's cool about this database is that it's live. It's almost like Wikipedia, in which anyone can create an account and input information. So new things are being discovered about each species every day. If you're keeping a species in Florida, it's not going to be the same as if you're keeping it in Canada. The water parameters are different coming from the tap. The outside temperature is different. Everything is different. And so being able to see how people have successfully kept the species in different areas is giving hobbyists something to try, so they don't have to completely start over. People can say, I was successful keeping them in these conditions. And if you're being unsuccessful with the species in the current conditions that you have them in, you can look and see for other people. And one of the main issues with the current database is that it's run by one individual or one really dedicated team. But there are a lot of fish species out there. And if I wanted to input all 18,000 of them by hand, it would take me forever. And so relying on the community to build this database, and the fact that it's individuals putting it in means that the species that get in here are the most relevant to the hobby. It means that somebody is keeping them. And that way we can mark and say, this species hasn't shown up in the database yet and it's endangered. So we should work on that. More people need to be working with this species because there's nobody currently doing it. I will show a live version of the database afterwards, or I guess you will, because it's on your screen, but I'll do that after this presentation. And it's completely free to sign up. I didn't want it to be behind a paywall. You can find research papers on a species, so that's targeted towards people who are researching behavior, or scientists that are researching potential health, like human health benefits from different species. So if you go to the next page, this just shows you a breakdown from the Triple Crown Convention and the fundraising totals. So everyone who donated is listed. And even though this doesn't seem like much, it does show the power of hobbyists, right? Together, this raised enough money for me to go back and fix all of the bugs in the database, which I'm working on. Obviously, the first draft of something is never perfect. But the way I did this is I actually created enamel pins of different species. So there are 6 different designs that I have so far. 3 of them are endangered species that are common in the hobby, and the other 3 were designed specifically for the Triple Crown Convention. And that's the sort of thing that we need to look at, is being more multimedia, right? People like something that they can hold. They like to support conservation efforts, yes, but they also want something to show that they did it, which is why we found the pins to be very successful. If you go to the next page, you'll see a quick description of our team. So there's me. I just gave this presentation. I'm Lily. But we're also partnered with Jelka McColgy and Chris from CE Fish Essentials. So we have one partner in the UK, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with McColgy. They recently discovered an Oscar that was named after Ivan. They're very popular fish photographers, and sharing that art has been very beneficial as well. So if you go to the last slide, you'll see the conclusions. The first one is freshwater fish need help, and hobbyists are the way to do that. What I found is that nobody is more dedicated about keeping that little brown fish that lives in the middle of nowhere than a hobbyist. I've been to people's fish rooms and they're like, oh, I collected this fish myself from this locality. I know everything about it. I've gotten it to spawn several times. And that's why they're so important. Because even if scientists want to do ex situ conservation, they're going to have to find all of that information all over again unless they can communicate with hobbyists. And the second one is that collaboration aspect, is that we have to work together or else this is not going to work. That's the last slide of this presentation, but I did, given the time constraints, want to play a game.
Okay.
So I don't know if anyone is on and able to give me screen share permissions. I'm trying to think of another way we could do this.
Okay.
I
All right.
invite you to a Zoom meeting. Would that work?
Pardon me? Sorry, I didn't catch
If
that.
I send you an invite to a Zoom meeting instead?
Um,
I don't know if that's allowed. Oh, I'm the host now. Great. I'm going to share my screen.
Oh, somehow you got made the host. So good.
Yep. Okay. Can you guys all see this now?
Yep. Let me get this chat off the screen. Oh, okay.
Great. So I don't know if any of you have played Kahoot before. If you guys could give me a show of hands if anyone's played before.
I can tell you in the room,
Yeah.
I have done it personally at work, but I don't know anyone else. Kahoot? There's a couple, there's a few that have done it.
Okay, great. So if you've done it before, please help out your neighbors, but I am going to ask you guys to actually pull out your phones now. And we're going to play. So go to your Samsung internet or Google Chrome, any form of internet that you may have, and go to kahoot.it. I see a fish emoji. And go ahead and enter this game pin, and then enter a username. So as you can see, people are already starting to show up.
Can you go through that again after Chrome?
It's kahoot.it.
You're going like your browser. Safari. Yeah, okay, Safari. Yeah. I just type it on the I'll do it for you. It'll work.
All right. All right, so let's say we've got quite a few now.
2,
What was
3,
the-
4, 5, 6. Yeah.
378.
Was it?
It's right on top of the screen, 379312.
Yep. So we'll wait a couple more minutes. The volume is the best part of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll wait a couple more minutes, and we'll go ahead and start. If you're having trouble logging in, you can also just play normally. We'll go based off of the honor system. But it's basically a trivia game. And this one is fish themed.
Is everyone on here?
Connecting,
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so we've got about, I'd say about 20 folks here, so you can, maybe I'll take the computer up real quick and you can kind of see, instead of looking at me, but you can look at the rest of the room here.
Right. Hi, everyone.
hello.
There's the rest of the folks, so.
Okay, is everyone in that wants to be in?
It looks like I think so.
All right.
379312.
I'm going to go ahead and turn on a light really fast because it looks like I'm fading into the darkness, and then we can go ahead and start.
All right.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Any objections?
Nope, we're good.
Great, let's get started. So I want to see how much you guys were paying attention. So here's the first question. What's my name?
Hey. Oh. Wait, what the heck?
Don't worry, I won't judge you guys if you get it wrong.
No, mine's like crap. I think I hit the wrong button.
Excellent.
No, I hit the wrong button by accident.
It's okay.
That was me. I know your name. I literally was trying to like click through it. I hit the wrong button. So that was me.
All right, so you do get points for speed as well as correct answer. Just keeping that in mind. That was a practice round. So what are my hobbies besides fish? I'm sorry, you guys were right. It is languages, but it is also all of the above. That was a little bit of a trick question on my end. Nice. Okay, now we're actually moving on to the presentation itself. So this is an easy true or false. We are very similar to fish.
Goes in one end, comes out the other.
It is actually true. So if you look at this image, this is a development chart. So you can see that the embryo in this first stage on top looks very similar all the way up until it's about to be born or it's about to hatch, which is the third stage at the bottom. But obviously we all kind of evolved from fish that crawled out of the water. And some humans are even born with a genetic defect that's gills right behind their ear that they didn't lose in development. Additionally, if you look at the structure of the fins on a fish, it's very similar to the structure that we have in our hands. So we are very similar to fish in a lot of ways. Next question. You can select multiple, but which one of these species is commonly used in science? All right, I want to see a show of hands. Who here has bred guppies before?
There's quite a few.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. So one of the reasons that guppies are so popular for research is because you can breed them so quickly. So one of the ways to study genetic defects or the effects on genetics of toxic substances, for example, is to introduce them to guppies and then breed them for 12 generations, because that takes a lot less time than experimenting with rats or monkeys or anything like that. And zebrafish are used because their eggs are, first of all, they're really easy to keep and breed. And second of all, their eggs are clear, so you can monitor development. And so they're often used for genetic studies, specifically before hatching or before birth. 3 players have reached, ooh, it's getting spicy. So these are example tanks of how they keep zebrafish in labs for studies and things like that. And, you know, one of the most popular branches of this research has actually been the glowfish. So they were studying the effects of certain jellyfish DNA on species, and that ended up making species glow in the dark. And then for guppies, another main research point is evolution. So it's easy to see the effects of natural selection or different kinds of artificial selection. As you can see from this picture, we've been able to breed all of these lines within a short period of time, which wouldn't be possible for other species. Next question, what makes cavefish unique?
Oh my God.
All right, congratulations to the one person who knows they're immune to diabetes. But basically, cave fish live in very nutrient poor areas. The only nutrients that they get in the cave is anything that washes through with storms or things like that. So they're used to going for long periods without eating. And that means that their insulin production is very, very regulated compared to a normal species. So the one on the top is the same species of fish, but the one that lives on the surface rather than in the cave. And as you can see, there have been a lot of adaptations, for example, the loss of eyes, the loss of pigmentation, but the surface one has to eat constantly. The cave fish on the bottom only has to eat once in a while, and scientists are actually researching them and their method of controlling insulin production in order to help find a cure or a treatment for diabetes. Next, we've got a species quiz. Should be pretty easy. Yes, okay, 100%. Nice. Okay, so this is the axolotl, right? And many people know that these are being studied for regeneration. They have the ability to regrow any of their limbs, most of their internal organs, and actually parts of their brain. And they've additionally been studied for transplant research and are basically immune to cancer. So many of them have been crossbred with tiger salamanders and things like that. But despite that, they're able to receive a transplant of organs from any other member of their species. As we know with humans, you have to be compatible blood types, and then there's still a chance of your body rejecting it as a foreign object, which makes it very unique that axolotls can accept any of those transplants. And obviously, it would be really cool if we could understand how they use stem cells to regenerate any part of their body. Because then instead of being on a waiting list for an organ transplant, for example, they could just grow you a new one. Or if you lose your arm in an accident, you could just regrow it, which obviously would be really, really cool. They've studied the different genes that cause growth. So here you can see that this one was tagged with glow-in-the-dark pigment, specifically to see the new growth versus the natural growth. And they used the stem cells to create an extra limb on this axolotl. Additionally, they can be studied for development, much like the zebrafish. This is one of the ones I bred, but you can see that the egg is clear, and taking it out of the water for short periods of time and being gentle with it doesn't actually damage it, which has a lot of potential for injecting things. There are people who are studying how to make chimeras, like specifically, I don't know if you've seen the firefly axolotls, where they take the tail of one axolotl and switch it with one of its siblings of a different color. So doing all of that in embryo is a very unique property of the axolotls that we've been studying. For the next question, are you familiar with this picture? There's no right answer, so just be truthful. Oh, wow. Okay, that's a lot more than I was expecting, actually. But what you can see here, this is one of the families that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but those dolphins are actually bouncing the pufferfish around on purpose because they get high off of the toxins. And one thing that's really unique about these toxins is their potential use in medicine. So they've been researching its use as a drug to help as a painkiller because it's non-addictive. So whereas many opioids are very addictive in terms of painkillers, the toxin that comes from pufferfish is not. And so they've been researching that use, and there are also lots of other medicinal uses for this kind of toxin that they're still investigating. But any freshwater pufferfish keepers or even saltwater pufferfish keepers are essentially holding a key, right? So many of these species are a key to further research. And that's why it's so important to link the hobbyists and the researchers, because in order to study them, we have to learn how to keep them alive, what causes them to thrive in an environment, right? Because for poison dart frogs, for example, we learned that the poison comes from what they eat, not something that they generate on their own. And that was learned from keeping them in captivity, right? So it's the same thing for these. How do we produce it in a way that is sustainable? So these are just two examples of freshwater puffer species that contain this toxin. I'm sure you guys have seen some of these, at least those of you who watch Aquarium Co-op, for example, has a big one named Murphy, or yeah. So what family does this fish belong to?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of more yellow ass. I heard it was yellow ass.
Excellent. I always love playing this Kahoot with hobbyists because everybody has such good answers. So this fish is actually being studied in the development of language. And so okay, this is a quote that I took from a paper, so it's very technical, but determining how temporally coded information is decoded by central neurons is essential to understanding how brains process sensory stimuli. And what that means is that they've been studying this species in order to try and find out how communication affects brain size, how language affects brain size, because mormyrids communicate using electrical signals. And when people go to collect them in the wild, they'll often measure the signals that the fish emit in order to determine the species, because each one is slightly different. But what you'll see here in this diagram is that the brain size depends on whether or not they use electrical signaling to communicate with each other. And so that's one of the theories for why humans evolved such a big brain, and then subsequently, or in conjunction with language, because we need those higher level brain functions just like these fish use. The next one. Okay, this is a speed round. This is the very end of the presentation, so these questions are just for fun.
It's hydro because there's not fish.
Exactly, it's hydroponic because they're not fish. I don't know if you said that, but you are absolutely correct. One of the reasons that I included this in the presentation is because for aquaponic systems, they're significantly more water efficient than traditional agriculture. And so even looking outside of the hobby and outside of research, having systems like this and including fish with aquaponic systems, for example, is potentially a way that we can be more land conservative while also producing fresh food. So the benefit of having it in greenhouses, for example, is that it's temperature controlled. You can control more easily for pests. You don't have to worry so much about the weather. And those are all more reasons that we rely on freshwater fish species. So it's not only that we like to keep them in tanks and watch them, but aquaponic systems can create so much more. They can create food security for people who live in food deserts. And everything like that. So being able to grow vegetables and consumable fish at the same time is a huge benefit. So this is what an aquaponic system would be. You've got fish in the bottom, plants in the top, or some variation of that. Have you read any of these books? 100%. So as you guys can see, humans have been taking inspiration from fish for a really, really long time. And the last one, why is fish keeping good for your health? Feel free to take this to a significant other or anyone who doesn't want you to get more tanks. It's scientifically backed. So this was, in fact, this question is specifically targeted towards my dad, who told me to stop sneaking fish with my backpack. I didn't listen. And that's how we ended up with all of the tanks that we do. But fish keeping is good for your health. So on top of people relying on fish for food, and on top of people relying on fish for their livelihoods and for research and all of these other reasons why freshwater fish have become so important to our society today, fish keeping is also just good for you overall. It creates routine and positive habits. It can watching fish swim reduces your blood pressure, which in turn can help better your sleep, and it decreases your stress and raises your mood. The fish hobby is, I believe, the second most common hobby in the US. It has, hundreds of thousands of people in it, and all of this ties together. So that is the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Any questions? Oh. How many fish tanks do you have?
Because I travel so much for school, I have lots of empty ones now. But I think my max before I left for college was 27. Oh, and here we have the podium. If we were in person, I would be giving out pins as prizes, but I totally slipped my mind when we were at the convention. So, you know, if you want to reach out and contact me afterwards, I can send some your way. I don't know who fish emoji was, but I appreciate that as well.
That was fun. I'm Sedna.
Hi! Congrats on winning.
That's not my real name. My name is Elizabeth, but that's actually my avatar on Conmo, which is an octopus keeping website.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like, in addition to freshwater fish, I also keep octopuses. And I would have to absolutely agree with you that there's just a better networking among saltwater keepers than freshwater keepers. I don't know why that is, but I wish it wasn't so.
Same here. I just realized that since I can screen share now, I can show you guys the database. I can just do that real fast. So if you go to, I'm trying to come up with a better name, but if you go to idefs.org, you can sign up for free and you can add species yourself. So for example, let's pick a common one. Let's go to the, traditional bushy nose, right? Or either one of these. You can see the different variations. And here you can add research papers and conservation efforts, which are then displayed on this map. So this map shows where they're native to, as well as the people that are working with them vaguely, just to see how many efforts there are already per species. And for more vulnerable species, you might want to add more efforts or things like that, but this is to determine which species are most in need of help. Then you can add breeding info or setup reports. So if you keep your fish in any separate or any different parameters, you can add that to the setup reports. Profiles are still a work in progress, but basically you can see what people specialize in, especially if you see that somebody has uploaded a lot of pictures for a particular species or family. And lastly, if you have wild caught fish and you know where they came from and who sold them to you, you can register them just like you would a purebred dog. Because what that does is it allows zoos to keep track of the lineage and be able to use them in conservation efforts. Because if a zoo doesn't know where something came from and you can't prove that you acquired it legally, they either have to pay a fine or they can't use it in their conservation projects. So it's pretty straightforward. In case you guys are interested, there is a video showing how to submit species and things like that. But this is the most tangible part of my project so far.
Cool.
Cool, thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And yeah, I can put my contact information in the chat if anyone is interested in reaching out to me or sharing images or anything like that.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, and then we can put it in, we can send it out through the club as well.
All right, that sounds perfect. In that case,
All right.
I'm done. Thank
You're
you
done,
so much.
yep. So we'll go ahead and do the auction portion of the meeting. I don't know if the people on other people on Zoom want to stay on or not, but if not, we can go ahead and close the Zoom down and do the auction part of the meeting.
All right, have fun, you guys. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, guys.